So we're gonna get started on this, and as I said, I'm Alan Woods, and I'm gonna be doing, it says pest management, but it's actually integrated pest management, right? How many people here are familiar with integrated pest management? How many people here actually use it? Okay, so we're gonna do a brief overview of how to use it and how to keep it simple, because I think sometimes we can overcomplicate this thing, and once you overcomplicate things, you tend not to use it the right way, right? So hive management is essential to the success of maintaining healthy honeybee colonies. But with so many different things out there, where do you start, right? Just think about it. You as soon as you've seen it all, as soon as you've heard it all, something else comes up, right? And there's always something new on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, right? So where do you get your information from? So, and again, don't get me wrong, social media is not bad. I like social media. You can get informative information off there. You just can't make it your primary source of information, right? Because most of it should come from the bees. So the problem is, a lot of times we want to learn how to be better beekeepers, when in fact we need to learn about the bees. If we learn about the bees, then we're gonna become better beekeepers by default. So here's the thing. Every year, millions of bee colonies die, right? They're lost because we're not listening to the bees, right? They die. What do I mean by we're not listening to the bees? There are normally 4 reasons in the winter why you lose your beehives, right? 4 reasons, and we're going to talk about them because I'm going to do a talk later on about preparing for the winter. But if we understand these 4 reasons and why the bees are dying, then we're more able to keep them through the winter. But when preparing your integrated pest management plan, there's 4 things you need to really think about. 1, you need to keep the bees dry. You need to keep them fed. You need to keep them growing, right? And you need to keep them safe, right? So if you don't keep them fed, they're gonna starve. If you don't keep them growing, they're gonna die because there's not enough bees to keep the cluster once you get to the winter. If you don't keep them safe via viruses or poor nutrition, they're gonna die as well, right? So those things are important. So by doing these 4 things, you'll keep stronger and healthy colonies. It is for this reason that you need to focus on a plan for each of the 4 causes of winter death, die-off every year. In this session, we're gonna focus on keeping the bees safe, right? So when we look at keeping the bees safe, we often think from varroa mites. And right, varroa mites can be very destructive. It's not, if not properly managed, the beekeeper will lose his hive, but you can keep bees with varroa mites. The truth is they're not going anywhere, right? So you have to manage them, right? And this is what integrated pest management is all about. Now I'm using the varroa mite as an example, but what we must understand is that there are more pests than just varroa mites, right? Could someone think of another pest that you have to deal with in your area? Foul brood, that's definitely one. Raccoons. Raccoons, that's a valid one. What about yellow jackets? Right? So integrated pest management, right, is a set of processes used to control pests without negatively impacting people, other life forms, or the environment. These processes are developed by incorporating beekeeping best practices to create a long-term plan for pest prevention. In order for these procedures to be effective, they must become a cultural norm within the beekeeping community, right? At the core of the IPM, Integrated Pest Management, we must remember that it is the beekeeper's sole obligation right? To implement methods that provide responsible solutions for protecting each other, the environment, and our interests, the honeybees. What am I saying here? When I say a cultural norm, how many people belong to a bee club? Do your bee club have an ongoing integrated pest management plan? Right? That should be a cultural norm. If you are in one area, then there's a good chance that everybody in that club has the same pests. They have the same problems. So when you get a brand new beekeeper who decides that I want to keep bees, right? I want to keep bees. What problems am I going to have? You should be able to give them an integrated pest management plan and say, hey, listen, this is what we've experienced here. This is how we deal with it. Right? And I'm not saying, well, I looked at this guy on YouTube and he said do this. I'm talking about test, verify, and document. We've done this for years. It works well in this area. It's not too wet. It's not too cold. This is what works for us. Right? This is critical. So we use one when I do my bees, and everyone who I know, I try to get them to implement the same thing. Although a beekeeper might think that addressing a threat to a colony means treating with chemicals, they fail to understand that integrated pest management starts with identifying the real problem, right? And taking appropriate actions to address the threat. For example, right? While a varroa mite infestation may be destructive to the honeybee colony, the problem is not the varroa mite, right? We think that's the problem. The problem is the lack of information that the beekeeper has about the varroa mite. And this knowledge would actually allow you to properly address the issue and to maintain it before it ever becomes a problem. So when you say I have so many mites, if you had to implement an integrated pest management plan prior to that, then you would know where you stand. You would never get to the infestation part. Right? And although we primarily focus on the varroa mites when we talk about the integrated pest management plan, as beekeepers, we must realize that the integrated pest management plan is not only about protecting the hive from varroa mites, but all threats. Anything that can be a threat to a colony. This includes hive beetles if we get them, wax moth, right? Predators like raccoons, in some area, bear, right? Ants, yellow jackets, bald-faced hornets, and any other thing that may decimate your hive. Right? Further up north, they got the giant Asian hornet. Right? So the first step is understanding and identifying your threat. Right? I had a guy ask me one time, he called and he says, I have all these little things falling in my hive and I don't know what to do. I said, calm down. What little things? And he says, I don't know what they're called. And then I said, go out and take a picture. So I took a picture and he texted to me. And it was those little earwig things. Right? And he says, well, but they're just everywhere. And I said, listen, they're not going to affect your hive. Right? So I was afraid he was going to go out there with raid or something. and you know, try to spray him because he was just really bothered by it. But if you understand what's a threat and what's not, then you'll understand how to deal with it. And that's the primary purpose of integrated pest management. So we're going to talk about this process, right? Below is the process of developing an integrated pest management plan, monitoring the threat, monitoring and identifying the threat. All right, and then we're going to talk about setting thresholds, right? So we're going to go through this whole plan. It's gonna be fairly simple and cut dry. By keeping the integrated pest management plan simple, as I said earlier, it gives the beekeeper a greater chance of following it, right? A simple but effective integrated pest management process has at least 5 easy steps that you can use to address every threat to the colony. So if you use this process, you can use it on everything. I don't care what threat you think you have, you can use it. The first one we just saw was monitor and identify the threat, right? Okay, so once you have identified the pest, gather as much information about the pest as possible to access the potential threat, right? So what's the threat behind varroa mites? Seeds, the vector for viruses, right? Viruses and things of that nature, right? So you need to try to figure out the pest. Yellow jackets, they're just vicious, right? They're gonna decimate your hive, right? So the giant hornet, Asian hornets, I learned something about them yesterday, that the giant Asian hornets cannot eat meat. They can't eat like the bees. They take the bees back. They feed them to the young eat them, and then they spew out a liquid that feeds the adults, right? So now that seems kind of crazy, but having that information, it allows you to deal better with this hornet. Now you know what we can do it, right? Like me personally, I'd probably go to Walmart, get some Frontline, right, which has flipanol in it, get some Frisky cat food, drop some of that cat food in there. I mean, the Frontline and the cat food, stir it in and set it up so that they would take it back to the hive. They feed it to the young, right? And it's gonna kill the young, but before it kills the young, they're gonna spit up the liquid and they're gonna drink it and it's gonna kill them too, so it'll destroy the whole hive. This is pretty much the same process with yellow jackets, right? So that's why I say you have to monitor and identify the threat, right? And then it says, but understand this, not all insects, weeds, or other organisms require controls or treatments. Many organisms are harmless and some are even beneficial. Can someone tell me a beneficial pest that you think that something that's a pest but it's beneficial? How about a yellow jacket? What would happen if you were able to eradicate all the yellow jackets in your area? Let me get some. You wouldn't, right?
I think I would stop out and roundabout as they're the cleaners of various dead things.
And not just that, they also kill a lot of pesky insects in gardens, mosquitoes, a lot of other things that they kill, right? So you don't want to just go and eradicate all of them. You just want to control the situation, right? Have anyone ever had aphids? They get rid of aphids. You have a lot of aphids left. So, you'd have to weigh the odds. So you just got to be careful and understand that, okay, they're not a threat until they become too many of them. Right? So you need to control the threat before you get there. And you do this, right? And it says, the process of accurately identifying and monitoring pests can assist in making an appropriate decision in conjunction with the proper thresholds, preventive measures, controls, and treatments. So in other words, what it's saying is you'll need to know how many is a threat before you start treating. That's called thresholds, right? And then correctly identify and monitor reduces the possibility of using pesticides or other harmful chemicals are used when they're not needed. In other words, you don't want to just use them just for the sake of using them. Right? So the next thing is in doing this, right? Before you start using pesticides, you always want to set a threshold, right? There's 3 different types of thresholds, right? Thresholds set the actions to be taken at each threat level, right? Setting a threshold will allow you to use other measures and controls before having to use any chemicals, which is the absolute last result. In other words, before you start treating poison or putting, chemicals in your hive, you want to take other measures, right? So you want to have a threshold level. So I give you, and I have an example of our integrated pest management plan. And I'll give it to you guys, and you can implement it and see if you can use it, right? But what this is saying is the threshold level is my base threshold level, right, is the first level that I take. So it may be like 1 mite, you know, and that's 1 per 300. Right, 1 per 100. So I measure it out to 300. So if I have 3 mites, that's 1 mite. So I can tolerate that level. If it gets to 2, right, then that may be my set threshold level. Right, your base is just your initial level, and you record it, and that's what you use. The set threshold level, right, there can be multiple set threshold levels, which indicate the action that should be implemented at each level. Once you reach a set threshold level, you should put the measure in place to reduce the threat. Now, the reason you want to do this is because it's better to do something than to do nothing. But it's better to do something in advance than wait till it becomes a problem, right? So my first set threshold level is 2. So if I have 6 mites in there, then you know what I normally do, I have a fogger, you know, and I'm old school. I have a fogger, and I'll put I gotta change that word, old school. Experience school. But I'll put, you know, I use mineral oil, and I just fog my hives. Takes like 2 seconds per hive. So I just fog them, right? The mineral oil, it works to a certain extent. But then my next set threshold level, if it's getting higher, then I may put a little acylic acid in there, right? Just a little bit more. Just I get a little more aggressive, right? But I'll only do it. It's just fall. Just go through and fall. So then, that threshold just keeps me abreast. Whenever I do my test, I just know what I have to do. So you should write it down, right? Then once I hit my action threshold, this is at the point where I have exceeded all my threshold levels, right? And then I must use more drastic means. This is when I would treat. I would use, it depends on the time of year, right? In the spring, I use a Formicro because it's a little more aggressive and I have time to recover if I hurt my queen. In the fall, I use acylic acid, right? And my method of using acylic acid, right? I treat every 3 days for 15 days because acylic acid is only good for 72 hours. Then it's not effective after that. Right, so I'll use that. And then, but I will give you some good news. I will tell you some good news. There's a company that is currently working on an extended version of acylic acid, which comes in the form of a strip. It's going to be a 50-day strip. You put it on, and you don't have to treat anymore. Right, that's common. The state of Washington has to approve it. FDA have to approve it, and then, you know, it'll be probably the easiest and most inexpensive treatment that we've had. Right. So that's coming. Go ahead.
What's your opinion on formic acid?
Formic acid is not bad. It's just you have to use it early in the year. If you use it in the fall, and you lose a lot of bees when you use formic acid. So I'd rather use it at the beginning of the year where the bees can build up and they can recover. If I have to use it rather than use it at the end of the year. So I don't believe in using the same treatment twice in 1 year. Right, so that's part of my integrated pest management plan. Right, my part is when I hit a certain level, if you know, just to treat, like especially when my bees come back from California, I'm going to use formic acid, right, to knock that load down, and then I'll test again in July. If it's higher than I want it to be, I'll test again in 20 days after I take some measures.
So
So
it's not like you're using paper.
what's that?
You're using vaporizer.
Yes, at the end I use a vaporizer, but I fall with it also. So that's not a treatment though. That's a control. So. And like I said, this may seem like convoluted right now. If we were at my place and I had all the equipment and I was showing it to you, you'd be like, oh, okay, I get this. But when I give you this pamphlet, you're gonna be like, oh, I get what he's saying. Right? You'll understand exactly what I'm saying. So, and right now, I'm just using mites, right? So. Okay, set thresholds. So this is where you treat. Then after this, you want to go to implementing preventive measures, right? So implementing prevention measures means after each threshold is met, you do something else, right? The measures are the first line in the integrated pest management plan is to manage and prevent pests from becoming a threat. So the first thing you want to do, you want to always assess the area, and then you want to make sure that you take the first steps. Now, here's the thing: how many people use screen bottom? How many people leave their screen slide out of the screen bottom? So I know a lot of people who leave the slides out, but I would tell you don't leave the slides out, right? And the reason why is I would wipe the slides down. I spray Pam on them and I slide them under there. So when the bees knock the mites off and there's a bunch of bees, the mites fall on that board and they stick. If you pull the bottom open, the mites fall all the way through, hit you right on another bee and back in the hive. Right? That's a preventive. You're doing something different. As beekeepers, this means using methods, right, and best beekeeping practices to stop the threat level from exceeding the action threat levels where controls and chemicals are needed. So in other words, you want to do whatever you can to stop from using chemicals, right? Whatever you can. What is another control? What could be another control? Drone frame. Perfect. Right. Drone frames. These control methods can be very effective, cost efficient, and present little to no risk to the people and environment. These best practices consist of methods such as screen bottom boards, brood breaks, and drone cells. Right? A brood break is another method. Can someone tell me what a brood break is?
Like when you cage your queen and don't let her lay for a week and. then let her-
Actually, you need to cage her and don't let her lay for 20 days.
20 days.
Not a week. So knowing this, you need to make sure that you have your hive. You need to make sure you have a super big hive before you start trying to do brood breaks. That your queen is really working. So what he's saying is exactly right. When you do that brood breaks, right? After 20 days, the last cell hatched. Right? The last cell hatched out. You do a treatment, one-time treatment, you'll kill just about every mite in there. With like acylic acid or something, then you let the queen go back to her business. That's a brood break, right? That's not a treatment, it's just a method that you can use. This can become your regular practice. Some people are afraid to do these things, but I tell you, they work. Right? Controls. After monitoring and identify the process, I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to tell you what it is. You just have to decide what it is that you're going to use. Right? You don't have to use everything, but you need to figure what you're going to use to help you slow down your problem. Now let's not talk about mites. This is, I told you, these processes are for everything. Right? If you had yellow jackets, how would you control? What would you use? Okay, what type of control do you put a trap out there? You can use flipanol, like I just said. These methods are for every single threat. You use these processes, then you say, okay, how am I going to do this? When am I going to use it? Why? And then you know what happens? When it happens, you're already prepared. You're not on YouTube trying to figure it out. Right? You already have a plan. That's the whole point. You have a plan and you can put your plan into action. Right? You have genetic controls, right? Genetic controls. This is when you go buy these $5,000 queens. That's supposed to be BSH, well, it don't cost that much. But genetic would be like buying a queen, a BSH queen, that produce in good qualities in the bees where they kill the mites when they're under the cap, right? And the suppressive mite reproduction. It's just, this is something that most queens do. That, like I said, the disadvantage is these queens are very expensive, right? That's genetic, right? Then you have mechanic, right? We just talked about some mechanics, so we use this as an example, right? There are many mechanic controls that can be used to maintain pest population because the action thresholds where more drastic measures are needed so that you don't have to use it. So however, mechanical controls differ from pest to pest. For example, when using a screen bottom board to monitor varroa mites, there are other types of mechanical control that you may use for yellow jackets. So you can't use the same thing for a different pest. What would you use for a bear? Or a skunk?
Straps.
You know, you'd have straps, you'd have, for a bear, you might want to use, and we found out the hard way, you might want to use electric fence, right? So, yeah, so it depends on where you are. It depends on your yard. It depends on where you keeping bees, what the pest is. Then you have your physical controls, right? Physical controls use the environment to reduce the pest threshold level. These practices include using heat, cold, light, humidity, carbon monoxide, ventilation, right, or sound to control the pest, right? Most pests have physical limitations that affect their activity to survive. For example, by placing a frame in a clear plastic tub in a well-lit room, it reduces the chance of the wax moth reproducing because they do it in the dark with two friends together. Another example I just found out last night without even knowing that I was going to find this out. There's a young lady here, she's a student. She's doing her advanced study on pear, I forgot what they call them, but like these bugs that Paracella. There she goes. Yeah, that's it. Paracella. I was listening, but yeah, Paracella. And she was saying that the sound that they make, the sound and the vibration for the male, the strongest vibration, the male, she hears it and then they mate, right? So they use sound to stop the male and the female from hearing each other. Right? They use sound. So they have I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the disco 80s or whatever, but they just have sounds that stop them from communicating. And that's exactly what that is, a physical control. And then you have a biological control, right? A natural biological control processes or materials, much such as beneficial insects, right, or various pathogens, often safe and sometimes economical methods of pest control, right? An example is diametric earthing. Anyone ever use that stuff? When you have slugs, this is what they're talking about. This is biological. That's an example. But again, these are for all pests. Any pest that, you may want to use this to stop ants from coming around your house, right? See, I've never liked the gas and the oil stuff because I honestly believe ants have a purpose. So if we could just keep them from being destructive, I would rather do that than to try to kill them. That's just me. Some people say I have a soft heart, but I think we've been given dominion to protect the environment, right? But we can't pick and choose what in the environment we're going to protect and we're going to kill. I'm not against deer hunters. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying things of this nature. So that's biological control. And like I said, I'm going to give you this sheet that's going to make all the sense in the world. And you're going to be like, wow, I understand what he's saying. Implement control methods. These control methods can be very effective and cost efficient, right? That present little to no risk to people or environment. These best practices consist of methods such as using screen binding boards, roof racks, and drone cells. Again, just this is for mites, something simple. Find the easiest way, right, ahead of time, and just write it down. Flies, right? You can have an integrated pest management plan for flies. If you get a lot of flies in your house, around your house every year, in the winter time, when you're sitting and you're not dealing with flies, now's the time to think about how am I gonna get rid of these flies? Right? You could use these steps and you can come up with a procedure to control these flies. Right? Now, of course, we're talking about bees. We're talking about bees, but I'm just using this to show you how to put this in, how you can put this in play. And then implement the treatments. Right? The initial test will be conducted in the spring if treatment is needed. This is for honeybees. An intermediate treatment should be used if the action thresholds have exceeded during the summer. Right? Again, you don't want to use the same chemicals twice in 1 year. So you need to already plan, what am I going to use this first? What am I going to use second? That's part of your plan. Never, ever, ever figure out what day you're going to use it on, because it doesn't work that way. Right? I'm going to use it on May 15th. No, you won't, because May 15th, it was still raining, the bees weren't flying. What are you going to do? Right? It's situational. It's situational. After the threshold has been met, do this. It's situational. The fall treatment should be used upon threshold being exceeded. The same thing. It's no different. And then when treated, closely follow all instructions. Right? Don't go Rambo. Don't go Rambo. You may not kill the bees, but you may kill something else. Right? What do I mean by that? I'm telling you. Sometimes we use stuff that it may not kill the bees, but it may hurt other pollinators. Right? And we need to particularly be careful about other pollinators. I tell you why. Run pollinators out of your area and your bees die off, you have nothing to pollinate where you live. Right? So you need to be particularly conscious about the pollinators. And that is it. So do you guys have any questions? And you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't like how fast I had to do this. Right? But I didn't want to be like him because I mean, like Ted, Ted, he had a lot of information, which is great information. But you guys didn't get to ask him any questions. I want to give you you got 5 minutes to ask a question. Okay, your time's up. No.
So, even though the tests that they've done with oxalic acid say that the recommended dosage that's on the package is not strong enough to produce the result, you still follow the
Yeah.
recommended?
Yes. The reason why you don't want excess, like oxalic acid in your oxalic acid dissipates over time, but you don't want to use a bulk. So now I know what you're getting at as far as like the package should use it every 7 days. Right?
And actually, it says, 1 ounce, it's the dosage, the
1 ounce
1
per
ounce.
1 ounce per
Yeah,
brood chamber.
yeah, and the research says that,
Two.
yes,
It's no, that's correct. They're not, you're not using more. It is correct. It's 1 ounce per brood chamber. So you should be using 2 ounces per hive if you have 2 bees on. So that's not excess. And it's the same thing. If you read the instructions, this is why I said the instructions. If you read the instructions, it's always like that. It's per brood chamber. So if you only have 1 box on it, then you need to use whatever they tell you for 1 box. If you have 2 boxes on it, then you need to use it what they say for 2 boxes. So it sounds kind of tricky, but it's really not. It's per brood chamber. So you really got to read the instructions. Any other questions?
Well, This isn't related to pest control necessarily, but we live in an orchard area. And I'm just wondering if there's any way to protect our bees that go flying out from the spray that's sprayed on the orchard. My husband sprays at night,
Right.
but a lot of some of the growers around still spray at night.
So here's the thing, and it's gonna take a concerted effort on everybody's part. So if you know who's spraying, or if you know the growers, then you want to communicate with them and ask them to at least give you a 24-hour notice of when they're spraying. And then, they'll let you know. So if I'm not mistaken, if grower sprays and your bees die, would I notify you? They're liable. Right, and I think something is in the works right now. I don't want to really say right now, because there's a powwow going on right now in Congress about this whole thing. Well, not in Congress, but in the state. About this whole, and I think it's gonna make its way there. So I think there is culpability on both parts. I think both people are they have to do due diligence, and they're responsible for doing something. I believe the one who sprays should let you know, right? And then once he lets you know, you need to make sure that you shut your bees up at night or something.
So shut them up.
Shut them up at night. You can shut them up for a day, they'll be fine.
They make a net, you can, like if you have 20 or less, you know, that would be economical. They have a net you can put over during the day, like if you can communicate when they're gonna spray around you or whatever, just net them up for that day.
And the spray affects the bees when it's wet. So once it dries, you can let your bees out and they're fine. Right? Just so, but just, you know, it's just communicating. It's communicating with your neighbors. And most important, you know what, we need to talk about responsibility, right? To not just the honeybees, but to all living creatures. You know, I mean, I know I sound, but it's just, it's good practice, good sense. Right? Good practice, good sense. Right? You know, you think about the meat, you treat beef like you wanna put in your body, chicken like you wanna eat, put in your body fish. Or you just throw chemicals in the water. Someone eats that fish and it's, you know, it's the same thing. So it's just one of those things we just have to be cautious. Integrated pest management, I'm telling you, this is a great plan. As a president of WASBA, my goal is to push this to every single club in Washington State. They need to have one of these, so when you come there, and you want to know what threat do I have, this is my threat, right? Because who's next after me?
John Jr.
That clock is fast.
Is it? Okay, so I still got 2 more minutes.
Alan, I'm just curious if you have sort of an outline of what I think would be per mallet. Boundary, like.
You know what? Let's write a book together. You know what? That needs to be in the book, because you're right. If we had that outline, then people could make an assertive plan, and then they could deal with a lot of these things before they become problems. Because the first thing that happens when it becomes a problem, you see people, Home Depot buy chemicals. So if we can fix this before it becomes a problem, we can stop that. But you're right. You know what? I will do an outline. I'll do an outline on each one of these things, these outliers that are destructive to the bees, and I'm gonna put it out there.
You know, as you taught us today, it's been playing. And now I'm like. It's kind of a Q&A that someone would go through the question like, what would your threshold be? Depends on where your hive is. If you're in Seattle or if you're out here in Philly, it's 2 different environments. And you ask a bunch of questions, but Bill, you work with it's my threshold here.
Well, so your threshold for the mite count is gonna be the same, or what should be the same wherever. And the reason why is when you start multiplying the number of mites that increase. So if you get 5 mites, my threshold is 5 per 100. That means that when I check my hive, I have 15 more mites if you multiply that, right? Times the number of bees you have thousands of mites in there. So that's really too high. So you need to bring that down drastically. So the threshold should be the same regardless. What you do at each threshold may differ. You see what I'm saying? What you do at each threshold is different, but the threshold should basically be the same. Because here's the thing, if your threshold is super high and you do nothing, and I'm your neighbor, eventually you're gonna start affecting me and my bees. You see? So,
I mean, this is probably really specific, but, when you do your mite check in spring and summer and all that, if you got 2 brood boxes, are you doing 2 checks on each time or just 1 for the whole hive?
you find the brood, mites multiply underneath the wax, right? You remember I said you need to understand the mites. If you understand what mites multiply, then you know where to find them. So I take a frame of brood and I shake it into a container, right? The bees that'll fly off, those are not nurse bees, those are fill bees and foragers. The ones that are crawling around, I get 2 cups of them, those are the ones that mites are gonna be on. Right?
And so you'll just do that 1 check.
Yep.
For that whole hive. Okay, I just heard it a month or 2 ago that people are doing it. More than 1 check on a hive at a time, and that seems like killing a lot of bees for.
Well, I don't kill them anyway. I use sugar. I'm a soft party. I don't use the alcohol one. Yeah. Any other questions? And you know what? You can email me anytime you want. We have Woods Bee Company. We have a store. You can call me. Anybody who's our customers, you know our policy. You're our customer for life. You know, you got a question, we have an answer. And if I don't have an answer, I'm gonna call WSU and we're gonna find out. All right, so our next speaker, hey, yeah, you guys can take a quick break unless you're going to the next speaker over there, whatever. But our next speaker